In episode 40, titled Integrate Penetration Test Elements, we weave penetration testing work into the broader assessment rhythm so the probing is coordinated, safe, and maximally informative. Penetration activities are not an add-on or a separate show. They are a strand within the assessment that must align objectives, timing, evidence, and operational tolerance so that vulnerability discovery turns into prioritized remediation rather than accidental outages. Done well, penetration testing validates not only whether vulnerabilities exist, but whether they are exploitable, how quickly they can be chained into real impact, and which fixes materially reduce risk. The integration mindset treats pen testing as an exercise in measurement and learning rather than a hunt for drama, and the planning that follows keeps both engineers and assessors focused on replicable proof and timely fixes. Start by confirming the high-level objectives so everyone agrees what the pen test will prove and why those proofs matter. Typical objectives include discovering unknown vulnerabilities, validating exploitability of known weaknesses, and producing prioritized, reproducible evidence that feeds risk-based remediation. Each objective must tie to decision-making. Discovery informs where to invest scanning and patch cycles. Exploit validation converts a vulnerability into a real-world risk metric. And risk prioritization translates technical severity into business impact so program managers can budget fixes. Naming the objectives up front also clarifies output expectations. The difference between a noise-heavy list of probes and a concise set of actionable findings that include proof-of-concept steps, affected assets, and suggested mitigations. Align the attack vectors you intend to exercise with the rules of engagement and spell those vectors out in operational language everyone uses. Rules of engagement, spelled ROE on first reference, codify permitted techniques and prohibited actions, and they must list the types of testing planned: external perimeter probing, internal network pivoting, web application exploits, and API-level attacks focused on business logic. Each vector carries its own safety profile. External scans are lower risk but may stress edge devices, while lateral movement tests and privilege escalation exercises intentionally probe for paths that, if handled carelessly, could impact services. By aligning vectors to ROE constraints and to explicit mitigation plans, you preserve both scope discipline and operational safety. Schedule enumeration, exploitation, and validation windows deliberately within the overall timeline so activities do not collide with other assessment tasks or business operations. Enumeration phases, footprinting, port scans, and discovery are typically non-disruptive but generate noise and must be visible to monitoring teams. Exploitation phases are higher risk and should be time-boxed into windows when staffing and provider coordination are assured. Validation windows confirm fixes and re-verify that exploits no longer succeed. Sequence these phases so evidence flows. Discovery yields candidates, exploitation confirms exploitability, and validation proves remediation. Build gaps between phases for triage and remediation planning, and ensure the calendar lists exact start and stop times, escalation contacts, and required monitoring sensitivity adjustments so no one wakes to surprises. Provide sanitized test data and seeded accounts that mirror real-world roles while avoiding use of live personal or sensitive records. Synthetic datasets should be realistic enough to exercise business rules, authentication flows, and permissioned UI slices without exposing actual PII or regulated content. Seeded accounts must have the right privileges to demonstrate privilege escalation and lateral movement when authorized, yet be tagged and time-limited so they cannot become persistent risk afterward. The documentation for each seeded artifact includes creation time, intended lifespan, cleanup steps, and responsible owner. These safeguards let testers exercise real attack chains while keeping customer data, backups, and logging pipelines free from unnecessary exposure. Define success criteria for findings so a discovered issue becomes a repeatable, defensible conclusion rather than an anecdote. Success criteria state what proof looks like: a captured shell with specific process context, a reproduced unauthorized read of a protected record with identifier, or an elevation of privilege that creates a new administrative token. Include replicability constraints, exact commands, payloads, and environmental conditions, so an independent reviewer can rerun the steps and confirm the result. Also require that success criteria map to observable signals in logging and monitoring. A successful exploit that leaves no trace is both worse for security and worse for evidence, so tests should prefer demonstrable outcomes that create forensics without causing business impact. Integrate deconfliction steps with operations and monitoring teams to avoid tests being mistaken for real incidents. Deconfliction means providing defenders with the test plan, source IPs, expected time windows, and a mapping of likely alerts so SOC teams can suppress automated incident escalations appropriately or tag events as test origin. This coordination prevents wasted response cycles while preserving the ability to observe how detection rules and playbooks behave under realistic attack traffic. Maintain a narrow channel, an agreed chat bridge or call bridge where operational teams can call for an immediate pause if they observe unexpected impact, and record deconfliction acknowledgments for auditability. Proper deconfliction turns testing into a tool for validation of both defensive detection and operational response. Capture environmental constraints up front, including provider-imposed throttling, rate limits, and active defensive controls that could blunt or distort tests. Many platforms include anti-automation measures or web application firewalls that will block test traffic if not coordinated. Cloud providers may impose API rate limits that hamper enumeration, and some services enforce account-level throttling that distorts exploit timing. Document these constraints so test plans can adapt by pacing requests, registering source ranges with providers, or using alternate accounts. And so findings consider whether the environment itself masked or mitigated attack paths. Recording constraints also clarifies where a detection finding reflects the defense rather than the absence of a vulnerability. Pre-authorize limited privilege escalation tests and lateral movement scenarios under controlled conditions so teams can validate real-world impact while preserving stability. Authorization should specify the scope-specific hosts, ranges, and accounts, and the acceptable methods to achieve escalation, whether via credential harvesting simulations, controlled token replay, or constrained exploit primitives. Each pre-authorized escalation includes an agreed rollback plan and a monitoring checklist to verify no persistent change persists after tests. Authorization must be explicit and time-boxed, with approval artifacts retained. This discipline keeps escalation experiments productive and contained, rather than improvisational gambles that risk unexpected collateral effects. Require reproducible evidence for every finding with timestamps and precise affected asset identifiers that connect the exploit to inventory records and the control summary table. Evidence packages should include command transcripts, tool outputs, screen captures, packet captures when justified, and links to logs that show the event with system timestamps and unique identifiers. Correlate these artifacts with asset UIDs from the inventory so traceability is straightforward and auditable. Reproducible evidence prevents disputes and speeds remediation because engineers can rerun the exact steps in a safe lab or patch environment and confirm fixes without guessing. Treat the evidence pack as the currency of the engagement. Insufficient proof delays closure. Plan immediate fix verification and retest windows for critical and high-impact findings so remediation is not an open-ended promise. When a critical exploit is confirmed, define a short retest timeline, hours, or a defined number of business days, depending on operational impact and patch availability. Provide a process for temporary mitigation validation, such as additional logging, network rule adjustments, or access restrictions, so risk diminishes while permanent fixes are scheduled. The retest procedure itself should be scripted so that when engineers mark an issue as resolved, assessors can validate with the same commands and evidence expectations used for discovery. This tight loop closes the velocity gap between discovery and assurance and prevents critical issues from lingering unverified. Watch out for common pitfalls, chief among them, scheduling penetration tests during peak usage without agreed throttling or suppression rules. Doing so risks degraded user experience, automated account lockouts, or false operational incidents that distract teams from other vital work. Another pitfall is insufficient provider coordination that results in defensive automation blocking the test before useful data is gathered. A third risk is poor evidence hygiene, using ephemeral notes rather than formalized artifacts, making remediation debates long and costly. Anticipate these traps by involving stakeholders early, documenting constraints, and enforcing evidence standards from day one so the engagement produces usable outcomes instead of anecdotes.
A quick recap tightens the narrative. Confirm objectives for discovery, exploit validation, and prioritized risk. Align vectors with the ROE and with provider constraints. Schedule distinct windows for enumeration, exploitation, and validation. Provide sanitized data and seeded accounts. Define success criteria that are reproducible. Integrate deconfliction with operations. Document throttles and defenses. Pre-authorize escalation under controls. Require time-stamped evidence tied to inventory identifiers. And schedule rapid retest windows for fixes. Saying this sequence aloud in your kickoff meeting makes accountability explicit and gives owners a clear checklist to attach to their calendars and ticketing systems.
To conclude, integration is complete when penetration activities are choreographed into the assessment flow with safety, reproducibility, and remediation velocity in mind. The next action is simple and consequential. Finalize the pen test schedule with named owners, signed ROE acknowledgement, source IP registrations with providers, and a committed retest cadence for critical findings. Then distribute the finalized timeline and evidence expectations to operations, monitoring, and development teams. With those steps taken, penetration testing stops being an episodic stress test and becomes a predictable, high-value instrument for reducing exploitable risk across the environment. Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.